Have you ever stood at a crossroads where every fiber of your being screamed to act, but the rules held you back like chains? Ethan Carter gazed at his reflection in the glass door of Gadget Haven, his broad shoulders still carrying the weight of military discipline 6 years after leaving the army. At 36, his body bore the scars of 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, a bronze star pinned to his past, a reconstructed leg, and nightmares that jolted him awake, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding as if he were still on the battlefield. He pushed open the door, stepping into a world that felt both familiar and foreign. A retail store in an Oakland shopping mall where chaos simmered beneath the surface, threatening the normalcy he craved. Could he find purpose here, in a place so far from the deserts where he'd once fought for justice? "Morning, soldier," called Daniel Harper, the store manager, as Ethan hung his jacket in the employee locker. It was a nickname Ethan tolerated, a faint echo of a life he'd left behind, though it stirred a quiet ache in his chest. "How's business today?" Ethan asked, his voice steady but his eyes scanning the room with a soldier's vigilance. "Always alert, always ready." "Too quiet," Daniel replied, scribbling numbers on a notepad, his brow furrowed with worry. "We need to push those extended protection plans, or the regional office will have my head." Ethan nodded, his mind already drifting to the growing problem plaguing Gadget Haven, a wave of organized thefts that had swept through the mall, leaving everyone on edge, a silent threat to the peace he'd fought so hard to protect. Born in Bakersfield, California, Ethan had enlisted at 18, seeking structure and escape from a life that felt aimless. Now, at 36, he sold gadgets to customers who knew nothing of his past, their indifference a quiet wound he carried alongside his physical scars. The morning unfolded with a deceptive calm, the hum of the store a soothing rhythm against the chaos in Ethan's mind. He helped an elderly woman pick a tablet for video calls with her grandchildren, her grateful smile a small balm to his restless spirit. He explained smartphone features to a teenager who'd saved every penny from his summer job, the boy's determination stirring a flicker of pride in Ethan's heart, a reminder of the resilience he'd once seen in young recruits. At lunch, he sat alone in the bustling food court, watching the Friday crowd. Families laughing, couples strolling, teenagers snapping selfies, their carefree joy a stark contrast to the tension coiling in his gut. This was the normality he craved, the routine he'd fought for, the absence of threats he'd dreamed of during long nights in the desert. But beneath the surface, tension simmered, a storm waiting to break. Back at the store, Ethan was arranging a display of laptops, his hands moving with precision, when Daniel called a brief staff meeting, his voice tight with urgency. "Listen up, everyone," Daniel said, his tone sharp as he showed grainy images from the security cameras, the faces of thieves blurred but their intent clear. "We've had 3 more theft incidents this week. Management's orders are clear: observe, report, but do not confront. The products are insured. You are not." Sophie Bennett, another sales associate, frowned, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "What about the police?" Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples, the weight of his role pressing down on him. "If the stolen goods are under $1,000, they won't even show up. It's city policy now." Ethan felt a familiar twist in his gut, a deep, gnawing frustration he hadn't felt since his army days, when orders from above clashed with the reality on the ground, leaving him powerless to act. He clenched his jaw, his voice low but firm, cutting through the silence. "So we just let them take what they want?" Daniel shrugged, his eyes weary, his shoulders slumped with resignation. "It's the cost of doing business in today's California. Not worth the risk of a lawsuit, or worse, over a few gadgets." Imagine you're Ethan, standing in that store, your military instincts screaming to act while the rules tie your hands, a suffocating weight on your chest. The weight of your past, those years fighting for justice, for safety, presses against the apathy around you, a silent betrayal of everything you've sacrificed. What would you do next? Option 1. Follow the rules, stay silent, and let the thieves walk away, hoping the system will handle it, even as your gut tells you it won't. Option 2. Take a stand, even if it risks your job, because you can't let injustice slide. Not again, not after all you've seen. Comment below with your choice, 1 or 2, and let's see what you do in Ethan's shoes. And if you're moved by stories like this, please subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world to us as we share tales of courage and redemption. Let's hit that goal together. Ethan's mind churned as he returned to the laptop display, his hands moving mechanically while his thoughts raced, a storm of doubt and resolve. The store buzzed with the hum of customers, their voices a distant murmur against the pounding of his heart. He couldn't shake the unease settling in his bones, a soldier's instinct that danger was near. He'd seen chaos before, on dusty battlefields, in the flicker of gunfire, but this was different. This was home, where the rules seemed to protect the wrong people, where justice felt like a forgotten promise. He glanced at Sophie, who gave him a knowing look, her eyes reflecting the same frustration, the same unspoken question. How long could they stand by and watch? The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Gadget Haven as Ethan restocked a shelf of earbuds, his movements precise, almost robotic, a soldier's discipline in every gesture. Then he saw them, 4 young men in their 20s, slipping through the entrance like wolves on the hunt. Their loose clothing and empty backpacks screamed intent, their confidence a silent taunt that set Ethan's nerves on edge. His pulse quickened, his soldier's instincts flaring to life, the air suddenly thick with the scent of danger. He caught Sophie's eye across the store. Her face paled, but she nodded subtly, her fingers tightening around the scanner in her hand, a silent acknowledgement of the storm brewing. For 10 minutes, the group prowled the aisles, pretending to browse, fingers brushing over AirPods, a smartwatch, an iPad. Their movements were quick, coordinated, brazen, as if they owned the place. They didn't even try to hide it, occasionally glancing at the cameras with smirks, as if daring someone to stop them, their laughter a grating challenge in the otherwise quiet store. Ethan's grip tightened on the radio at his hip, his knuckles whitening, his breath shallow. "Daniel, we've got company in the portable electronics section," he said, his voice low but steady, the words clipped with a military precision he hadn't used in years. "I see them on the cameras," Daniel replied, his tone sharp with tension, a crackle of static underscoring his words. "Standard protocol, do not intervene." The tallest of the group, a young man with dark hair and a cocky grin, grabbed a $900 MacBook from the display, the price tag glinting under the store lights, a silent testament to their audacity. He stuffed it into his backpack with a casual arrogance, then turned to Ethan, his eyes glinting with challenge, a predator sizing up his prey. "Got a problem, man?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery, a taunt that echoed through the aisle. Ethan forced his expression to remain neutral, though his blood boiled beneath the surface, a fire stoked by years of fighting for justice, for order, for the very safety this young man was so casually dismantling. "Can I help you with any information about that product?" he asked, his tone even, professional, a mask over the storm raging inside him. The young man laughed, a sharp, grating sound that cut through the hum of the store. "Nah, I'm just browsing," he sneered, moving to another display where he snatched an iPad with the same careless entitlement, his movements a deliberate provocation. The radio crackled again, Daniel's voice cutting through the haze of Ethan's thoughts, a lifeline in the chaos. "Ethan, this is Daniel. Stay calm. Let them leave without incident." Ethan's jaw clenched, his mind a storm of conflicting impulses, his hands trembling with the effort of restraint. He watched the group head for the exit, their backpacks bulging with stolen goods, their laughter a taunt that grated against his every instinct, a mockery of the values he'd fought for. His eyes darted to a young family near the entrance, a father holding his daughter's hand, the little girl's laughter a bright note in the hum of the mall, her innocence a stark contrast to the darkness unfolding before her. The sight hit Ethan like a grenade, shattering the fragile calm he'd been clinging to, his breath catching in his throat. Safe communities, the very thing he'd fought for, bled for, lost friends for, were crumbling right here, in this store, under the weight of apathy, a betrayal of everything he'd sacrificed. His breath came shallow, his hands trembling as he stood frozen, torn between the rules and the fire in his chest, a soldier caught between duty and orders once again. Memories flooded in unbidden, pulling him back to a dusty road in Iraq, the air thick with the stench of burning fuel and the screams of civilians in the distance, their cries a haunting echo in his mind. His unit had been ordered to stand down during a civilian evacuation, even as he heard the cries of those left behind, their voices a desperate plea for help he couldn't answer. The guilt of that day, the faces of those he couldn't save still haunted him, a weight he carried in every step, a scar deeper than the one on his leg. He remembered the heat of the desert, the grit of sand in his mouth, the weight of his rifle in his hands as he stood powerless, his commander's voice a cold command in his ear. "Stand down, Carter." That's an order. The screams had faded into the distance, but they never left him, their echoes a constant reminder of the cost of inaction. Should he act now, or let these thieves walk away, just as he'd been forced to stand by then? The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken stakes, the hum of the store fading into a distant buzz as his heart pounded in his ears, a drumbeat of resolve and fear. Then, as if a switch had flipped, Ethan moved, his decision made in the space between heartbeats. In 3 long strides, he positioned himself at the store's entrance, his boots planted firmly on the tiled floor, arms crossed over his broad chest, a silent sentinel, unyielding as a mountain, his presence a wall of resolve. The group froze, their confidence faltering at his sudden presence, their laughter dying in their throats, replaced by a tense silence. The leader, the one with dark hair, later identified as Caleb Reed, stepped forward, his voice tight with a mix of bravado and unease, his eyes darting nervously to the growing crowd. "Move aside, man. You know you can't touch me," he said, his words a challenge, but his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt, a crack in his armor. Ethan didn't respond, his gaze fixed on a distant point, just as it had been during guard duty in Fallujah, when he'd stood watch under a starless sky, the weight of his rifle a comfort against the unknown. The silence of the desert a stark contrast to the chaos in his heart. "Ethan, what are you doing? Get out of there now." Daniel's voice crackled over the radio, laced with panic, a desperate plea that went unanswered. The mall buzzed around them, shoppers pausing mid-step to watch, tension rippling through the air like a gathering storm. A man in a baseball cap pulled out his phone, filming the standoff, while a group of teenagers whispered excitedly, their voices a low hum, their eyes wide with anticipation. A mother pulled her child closer, her eyes wide with curiosity and fear, as the crowd grew, a sea of faces drawn to the unfolding drama, their whispers a rising tide. "Last chance, big guy," Caleb sneered, his bravado a thin mask over his growing unease, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "It's not worth losing your job over this junk." Ethan remained a statue, his silence louder than any words, his presence a wall of resolve that seemed to fill the space around him. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of awe and apprehension, their voices a chorus of curiosity and judgment. A teenage girl whispered to her friend, "Is he a cop or something?" while an older man shook his head, muttering, "Someone had to do something." Caleb's frustration boiled over, his temper snapping like a taut wire. He lunged forward, shoving his shoulder against Ethan, but it was like pushing against a brick wall. Ethan didn't budge, his body a fortress of muscle and memory, forged in the crucible of war. When that failed, Caleb's desperation took over, and he swung a wild punch toward Ethan's face, his fist cutting through the air with reckless force. With lightning speed, Ethan caught Caleb's fist midair, his grip iron-tight, neutralizing the blow as if swatting a fly, his movements a blur of instinct and training. His eyes locked onto Caleb's, a storm of resolve in his gaze, the kind of look that had once stared down enemies in the desert, unyielding, unbreakable. "Let go, man," Caleb stammered, his voice cracking, his earlier confidence crumbling under the weight of Ethan's unyielding stare. But something in Ethan's eyes, a quiet, unyielding intensity, forged in the fires of war, made Caleb swallow the rest of his words, his bravado replaced by a dawning fear, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Caleb, this isn't working," one of the other young men muttered, his voice trembling as he glanced nervously at the crowd, his hands shaking as he clutched his backpack. Phones were everywhere now, capturing every second, their flashes a constellation of judgment, a digital jury bearing witness. A woman in a red coat gasped, "He's so calm, it's like he's done this before," her voice a mix of awe and fear, while a man nearby nodded, "Good for him. These kids think they can take whatever they want." Daniel appeared at Ethan's side, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly, his eyes darting between Ethan and the crowd. "Please, Ethan, let them go," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the crowd, a plea born of fear and duty. Ethan didn't answer, his grip on Caleb's fist unwavering, his mind a battlefield of past and present, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. Caleb's bravado crumbled further as he realized the gravity of his actions. Assaulting an employee was far worse than theft. a line he hadn't meant to cross, a mistake that could change everything. "I'm putting it back, okay? I'm putting it back." Another thief stammered, his voice high with panic as he pulled an iPhone from his backpack and set it on a nearby counter, his hands shaking as if the device burned him. The others followed, their hands trembling as they emptied their stolen goods in a frantic rush. The clatter of electronics on the counter a stark contrast to the silence of Ethan's resolve, a testament to the power of his stand. Caleb, still trapped in Ethan's grip, looked around, his earlier arrogance replaced by a raw, desperate fear, his eyes darting to the crowd as if searching for an escape, his breath hitching in his chest. The crowd pressed closer, a sea of curious faces and flashing cameras, their whispers a rising tide, a chorus of awe and debate. Ethan finally spoke, his voice a low growl meant only for Caleb, each word deliberate, heavy with the weight of his past, a soldier's promise in every syllable. "You tried to assault me. Now you wait for the police." Time crawled, each second heavy with tension, the air thick with the scent of anticipation and fear, the hum of the crowd a distant roar in Ethan's ears. The other three thieves, sensing the situation spiraling beyond their control, dropped the remaining items and bolted, their footsteps echoing as they disappeared into the mall's chaos, leaving Caleb behind, pinned by Ethan's grip and the weight of his own choices. A young man caught in the consequences of his actions. 5 minutes later, 2 security guards arrived, their eyes widening at the scene. A towering man holding a young thief's wrist, a pile of recovered electronics on the counter, and a crowd buzzing with excitement, their phones still recording. Their voices a mix of admiration and disbelief. "This man attempted to assault me after shoplifting," Ethan explained, his tone as professional as his military reports, each word measured, precise, a soldier delivering a briefing. The others fled, but the cameras should have their faces. Daniel stood nearby, his expression a mix of relief at the recovered goods and dread of the fallout, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, his shoulders tense with the weight of what came next. The police arrived, their radios crackling as they filed reports, their movements efficient but weary, a routine they'd performed too many times. Caleb, who had a record of petty crimes, was detained for the attempted assault, his head bowed as he was led away, the fight drained from him, his earlier bravado a distant memory. At the end of the shift, Daniel called Ethan into his office, the small room feeling smaller under the weight of the day's events, the air thick with unspoken tension. "I have to report this to regional management. You know that," Daniel said, massaging his temples, his voice heavy with exhaustion, his eyes shadowed with worry. "I understand," Ethan replied, his voice steady, his eyes meeting Daniel's with a quiet resolve, a soldier accustomed to facing consequences. "What you did was against protocol. It could have been dangerous," Daniel continued, his tone softer now, tinged with something like admiration, a flicker of respect in his gaze. "I understand that too," Ethan said, his gaze unwavering, his heart steady despite the storm of emotions within him. Daniel sighed, his shoulders slumping as he leaned back in his chair, the weight of his position pressing down on him, a burden he carried every day. "Why, Ethan? Why take the risk?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly, revealing the strain he'd been hiding, the fear and frustration he'd kept buried. Ethan paused, his mind drifting to a memory he rarely let surface, the kind that woke him in the dead of night, his sheets soaked with sweat, his heart racing as if he were still in the desert. He was back in Iraq, the air thick with dust and the stench of burning fuel, the screams of civilians echoing in the distance as his unit stood on a crumbling road, their boots sinking into the sand. His commander had ordered them to stand down during a civilian evacuation, even as Ethan heard the cries of those left behind, their voices a desperate plea for help he couldn't answer. He'd wanted to act, to run toward the danger, but the rules had tied his hands, and the guilt of that day, the faces of those he couldn't save, still lingered, a scar deeper than the one on his leg, a wound that never healed. "In Iraq and Afghanistan," he said slowly, his voice tightening with the weight of memory, "I was told we were fighting for values, for safe communities where people respect each other." He paused, his throat tight, the words heavy with years of unspoken pain, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "I come home, and we're abandoning those values right here, with no one even holding a gun to our heads." Daniel looked away, his own frustration bubbling to the surface, his fingers drumming nervously on the desk, a restless rhythm of his own inner conflict. "It's not that simple, Ethan," he said, his voice low. Almost a whisper, his eyes clouded with emotion. Company policies. I've got a family to think about. My wife, my kids, they depend on me keeping this job. I hate this as much as you do, watching these thieves walk in and out like they own the place, knowing we can't do anything about it. But my hands are tied. He paused, his eyes meeting Ethan's, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through his usual composure, a man torn between duty and desire. I admire what you did, I really do. But I can't take that kind of risk, not with everything I've got on the line. Ethan nodded, a flicker of understanding in his gaze, a shared frustration bridging the gap between them. I'm not blaming you, Daniel, he said quietly, his voice soft but firm. I know you're doing your job. I can't pretend it makes sense to me, letting this happen day after day, watching the world we fought for slip away. That night, in his small, orderly apartment, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, the day replaying in his mind like a battlefield report, each moment etched in vivid detail. The hum of the city filtered through his window, a distant siren echoing the chaos of his thoughts, a reminder of the world outside his walls. He felt no pride, no satisfaction, just the quiet certainty of having done what was right, as he had in his army days, when the stakes were life and death, when every decision carried the weight of survival. But the weight of the day lingered, heavy on his shoulders, a reminder of how far he'd come, and how far he still had to go. He thought of the little girl in the store, her laughter a beacon of the normalcy he craved, and the faces of his fallen comrades, their voices a whisper in the back of his mind, their memory a constant presence. Had he honored them today, or had he simply acted on impulse, risking everything for a moment of justice? His phone buzzed, pulling him from his reverie, a message from Sophie. Have you seen what's online? She'd sent a link to a TikTok video. The confrontation at Gadget Haven, filmed by a bystander, had already racked up 150,000 views in just a few hours, a viral storm he hadn't anticipated. Ethan clicked the link, his heart sinking as he scrolled through the comments, each one a new weight on his shoulders. This guy's a hero. Finally, someone standing up to these punks, one user wrote, their words accompanied by a string of clapping emojis, a wave of support that felt both validating and overwhelming. But another comment stung, cutting deeper than he'd expected. He's just a bully, intimidating kids over some gadgets. What a wannabe cop. The words hit Ethan like a punch, stirring a mix of anger and doubt, a new kind of battle he wasn't prepared for. Was that how people saw him? A bully, a vigilante? He set the phone down, his hands trembling slightly, the weight of public perception a burden he hadn't sought, a new challenge in a life already marked by struggle. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the store, the air thick with tension as he stepped through the glass doors, his boots echoing on the tiled floor. Two regional executives were already in Daniel's office, their suits crisp, their expressions unreadable, a stark contrast to the chaos of the day before. Daniel stood behind his desk, his face a mask of apprehension, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, his eyes darting nervously between Ethan and the executives. Your actions violated our non-intervention policy, the woman in a sharp gray suit said, her tone clipped, her eyes cold, her words a judgment that hung heavy in the air. We understand your intentions, but we can't allow employees to take such risks. Ethan stood tall, his military bearing a shield against her words, his heart steady despite the storm within. I understand, he said, his voice calm, steady, the same voice he'd used to deliver reports in the field, a soldier facing judgment with unwavering resolve. However, the other executive interjected, his tone softer, more calculated, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The video has generated significant positive publicity for Gadget Haven. Customers are praising us for taking a stand. Some are even calling for more stores to follow your example. Daniel's eyes widened, as surprised as Ethan, his mouth opening slightly before he caught himself, a flicker of hope in his gaze. So, the executive continued, his voice warm but firm. We'd like you to take a new role as a security consultant for our region, training teams, developing protocols, all within legal limits. Ethan blinked, the words sinking in slowly, like a message relayed through static, a lifeline in the chaos of the past 24 hours. You're promoting me for breaking the rules? He asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. a rare crack in his composed exterior. "We're recognizing your experience and initiative," the executive corrected, his tone firm but warm, a nod to the value of Ethan's actions. "Our customers and employees deserve to feel safe, and you've shown us what that can look like." In the weeks that followed, Ethan's life transformed in ways he hadn't anticipated, a whirlwind of change that left him reeling. The TikTok video spread like wildfire, amassing over 1 million views in days, sparking heated debates across social media platforms, a digital storm that swept Ethan into the spotlight. Local radio stations called, their hosts eager to hear his story, their voices warm with admiration, and a state news channel invited him for a brief segment, their cameras capturing the quiet intensity in his eyes, a soldier's resolve in a civilian world. Most saw him as a hero, a veteran who'd confronted the growing wave of impunity with the same courage he'd shown on the battlefield, a beacon of hope in a world that often felt hopeless. "He's what this country needs, someone who won't back down," one commenter wrote on X, their words echoed by thousands of likes, a wave of support that both uplifted and overwhelmed him. But a vocal minority labeled him a reckless vigilante, their comments cutting deep, a dagger of doubt in his heart. "This guy's dangerous. What if he'd hurt that kid? We don't need vigilantes in our stores." Ethan read the comments late at night, the glow of his phone casting shadows on his face, each word a new weight on his shoulders, a reminder of the cost of standing up. He'd never sought the spotlight, never wanted to be a symbol, hero, or villain. All he'd wanted was to do what was right, to protect the normalcy he'd fought for, to honor the sacrifices of those who hadn't made it home. The conflicting labels weighed on him, a new kind of pressure he hadn't faced in the army, where the mission was clear, even when it was brutal, where the enemy was defined, not a faceless crowd behind a screen. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Wednesday evening, Ethan sat in a circle at the Oakland Community Center, surrounded by fellow veterans who understood the scars he carried, both the ones that showed and the ones that didn't, the invisible wounds that lingered long after the war. The support group was his sanctuary, a place where he didn't have to explain the nightmares that woke him, the faces that haunted him, the guilt that lingered like a shadow, a constant companion in his quiet moments. The room smelled of stale coffee and old wood, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on the faces around him. Men and women who'd seen the same horrors, fought the same battles, and now struggled to find their place in a world that didn't always understand, a world that moved on while they remained tethered to the past. "I need to share something," Ethan said, his voice steady as he recounted the incident at Gadget Haven, leaving out the media frenzy many already knew about, his words a quiet confession in the safety of this circle. He spoke of the theft, the confrontation, the moment he'd chosen to stand, his voice measured but heavy with emotion, each word a step toward understanding. "What got to me wasn't the stolen goods," Ethan explained, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his knuckles white, his voice trembling with the weight of his words. "It was realizing we fought for rules and values overseas that we don't even uphold here. I risked my life so people halfway across the world could have safety, while here, we're just giving up." He paused, his throat tight, memories of Fallujah flickering through his mind, the heat of the desert, the weight of his gear, the sound of a friend's laughter cut short by an ID, a moment frozen in time. He'd lost so much, sacrificed so much, for a cause he'd believed in, only to return to a country that seemed to have forgotten what that cause meant, a betrayal that cut deeper than any bullet. A heavy silence settled over the group, the kind that spoke louder than words, a shared understanding of loss and longing, a bond forged in the fires of war. Nathan Brooks, a former Marine who'd lost a leg in Afghanistan, broke the silence, his voice rough but warm, a lifeline in the stillness. "Sometimes, Ethan, all it takes is one person willing to stand up, literally," he said, drawing soft chuckles from the group, a moment of levity in the weight of their shared pain, a reminder of the resilience that had carried them through. "What you did, we get it. It's not about violence. It's about integrity. We've all been there, facing down something bigger than ourselves, knowing we can't just walk away." Amelia Foster, an Air Force veteran with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, nodded, her expression thoughtful, her voice a gentle counterpoint to Nathan's gruff warmth. "I agree, but not everyone sees it that way," she said, her tone gentle but firm, her words a mirror to Ethan's doubts. To some, you're just a big guy intimidating kids. They don't see the context, the values you're fighting for. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt, her words echoing the online comments that had kept him up at night, a reflection of the world's divided perception. They weren't kids, he corrected, his tone firm, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity. And I didn't intimidate anyone. Not to us, Amelia continued, her gaze softening, a flicker of empathy in her eyes. But to many civilians, especially here in Oakland, your actions seem excessive. It's about perception, Ethan. People see what they want to see, not what you meant to do. Ethan leaned back in his chair, her words sinking in, stirring a mix of frustration and reflection, a challenge to his understanding of his own actions. So what are you saying? He asked, his voice low, a challenge in his tone, a soldier seeking clarity in the fog of war. We just accept rules that don't make sense because most people ignore the problem? Amelia's gaze held his, steady and unflinching, a quiet strength in her presence. I'm saying there might be a middle ground, a way to use your experience without causing more division. You've got a chance now, with this new role, to show people what integrity looks like without crossing that line. The discussion stretched on, each veteran sharing their own struggles with reintegration, their voices a tapestry of pain, resilience, and hope, a chorus of survival. Nathan spoke of the day he'd lost his leg, the explosion that had changed his life, the searing pain and the long road to finding purpose again through mentoring young veterans, his voice thick with emotion as he recounted the first time he'd walked again, the prosthetic a reminder of his loss and his strength. Amelia shared a story of her own, a mission where she'd had to make a split-second decision that saved her crew but left her questioning her choices for years, the weight of that moment a constant companion in her quiet hours. Ethan listened, their words a mirror to his own struggles, their stories a reminder that he wasn't alone, that they all carried the weight of their pasts. He thought of a night in Afghanistan, the air cold and sharp, when he'd sat with his squad around a small fire, sharing stories of home to keep the darkness at bay, their laughter a fragile shield against the fear. One of those men, a young private named Jackson, hadn't made it back, his laughter silenced by a sniper's bullet the next morning, a loss that still cut deep. Ethan had carried Jackson's tags home, a promise to live for both of them. And today, in that store, he'd felt that promise come alive again, a spark of purpose in the darkness. As the group dispersed, Ethan walked to the parking lot with Nathan, who limped slightly on his prosthetic, the night air cool against their skin, the stars above a silent witness to their shared journey. Amelia's got a point, Nathan said, lighting a cigarette, the glow casting shadows on his weathered face, the scent sharp and bitter in the night air. But I also know what it's like to sacrifice so much for a country that doesn't seem to care anymore. He exhaled a cloud of smoke into the night sky, the wisps curling upward like ghosts of their past. It's not about recognition, Ethan replied, his voice quiet, his eyes fixed on the stars above, a soldier searching for meaning in the vastness. It's about purpose. In the army, I knew my mission, even when it was hard. Now, I'm not sure. Nathan turned to him, his eyes searching, a question in his gaze, a challenge in the stillness. What's your mission now, soldier? Ethan had no answer, the question echoing in the silence, a challenge he couldn't yet meet, a seed planted in the fertile ground of his resolve. The next morning, Ethan began his new role as regional security consultant for Gadget Haven, stepping into a training room filled with managers from across the region, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The room buzzed with nervous energy, the air thick with the scent of coffee and anticipation, as Ethan took the floor, his presence commanding attention. The secret is a visible presence, he said, his voice steady, resonant, the kind of voice that had once rallied troops under fire, a soldier's clarity in a civilian world. We don't need to intimidate. We just need to show we're alert, that we're paying attention. He paused, his eyes scanning the room, meeting each manager's gaze with a quiet intensity, a soldier assessing his troops. It's about creating an environment where theft isn't normalized, where people know there are consequences, not through violence, but through vigilance. A manager at the back raised a hand, his tone skeptical, his brow furrowed with doubt. And when they do come, because they will. Ethan nodded, his expression calm but firm, his resolve unshaken. We report, we use legal tools, and we work with the community to make this behavior unacceptable. It's not about fighting, it's about standing firm. Some managers exchanged skeptical glances, their doubt palpable, a reflection of the broader challenge Ethan faced, a reminder of the uphill battle ahead. He felt it too, the weight of their uncertainty, the enormity of the task before him. But something had shifted inside him, a spark reignited by the incident at the store, a flame that refused to be extinguished. It wasn't just about stopping a theft, it was about rediscovering his purpose, about finding a way to fight for the values he'd once sworn to protect, even in a world that seemed to have forgotten them. Over the next few weeks, Ethan threw himself into his new role, implementing his program across 5 stores in the region, his days a blur of training sessions and strategy meetings. He spent long hours walking the floors, observing, adjusting, his military precision a guiding force, his presence a steady anchor for the staff. The results were striking, a 40% drop in thefts, achieved not through confrontation but through visibility, training, and community engagement, a testament to the power of his approach. Store managers began to report more than just fewer thefts. Employees felt safer, more valued, their morale lifting as they saw the impact of Ethan's work, a ripple effect of change. One manager, a woman named Clara from the Fremont store, pulled Ethan aside after a training session, her eyes bright with gratitude, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've worked here for 10 years, she said, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, "and I've never felt this safe. Thank you, Ethan. You're making a difference." Her words hit Ethan hard, a reminder of why he'd taken that stand, a validation of the purpose he was beginning to reclaim, a spark of hope in the darkness. But even as the program succeeded, Ethan couldn't shake the lingering doubts, the online comments, the label of vigilante, the fear that he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross, a shadow that followed him even in his moments of triumph. He stood in the San Leandro store one busy Saturday, overseeing a training session, his mind a tangle of pride and uncertainty, when a familiar figure appeared at the entrance, a ghost from the past that stopped him in his tracks. Caleb Reed, the young man who'd tried to assault him, stood there, looking different, his dark hair gone, replaced by a natural shade, his demeanor subdued, almost hesitant, his hands stuffed in his pockets as he scanned the store, his eyes searching for something or someone. Ethan approached, his expression calm but cautious, aware of the staff and cameras around him, his heart pounding with a mix of curiosity and wariness, a soldier facing an unknown threat. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone neutral, his eyes searching Caleb's face for answers, a new chapter in a story that had already changed his life. Caleb shifted uncomfortably, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his eyes darting nervously to the floor. "I actually came to talk to you," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, his usual bravado replaced by a vulnerability Ethan hadn't expected. "I've got a court date next week. Community service, not jail." Ethan nodded, unsurprised, his expression calm but his mind racing, a soldier assessing the situation. "What do you need from me?" Caleb hesitated, then met Ethan's gaze, a flicker of sincerity in his eyes, a young man seeking redemption. "Nothing really. I wanted to say you could have broken my arm that day. Or worse. But you didn't." He looked down, his voice softening, a crack in his armor. "My lawyer showed me your record. 3 tours, a bronze star. You've seen things I can't even imagine, and I tried to punch you over a laptop." Ethan studied the young man, seeing a flicker of vulnerability, a chance for something more, a spark of hope in the darkness. "Would you like some coffee?" he asked, his tone gentle, a soldier extending a hand across the divide. 20 minutes later, they sat in the food court, an unlikely pair, the decorated veteran and the former thief, talking like old friends, the hum of the mall a distant backdrop to their conversation. "I grew up in East Oakland," Caleb said, fidgeting with his coffee cup, his fingers tracing the rim as if seeking comfort in the motion. "Mom worked 2 jobs, I never knew my dad. I started stealing because my friends did. It made me feel like I belonged somewhere." He paused, his voice cracking, a young man bearing his soul. "I'm not making excuses, just explaining." Ethan nodded, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a shared understanding of struggle. I get it more than you think. Bakersfield wasn't so different. Caleb looked up, curious, his eyes searching Ethan's face for answers. Why'd you enlist? Ethan leaned back, the question stirring memories, a soldier revisiting his past. For structure, purpose, and escape. It worked for a while, until I realized I was fighting wars I didn't fully understand, for reasons that kept changing. Caleb listened, his usual bravado replaced by quiet attention, a young man learning from the man he'd once tried to fight. But I learned something. Ethan continued, his voice steady, a soldier's wisdom in every word. Integrity doesn't depend on the situation. You either have it, or you don't. Caleb's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through, a young man seeking a path forward. You think I can have it? Ethan smiled faintly, a rare warmth in his chest, a soldier seeing hope in the next generation. Everyone can. It's a choice you make every day. When they parted, Caleb extended a hand, a gesture of respect, a bridge between their worlds. Thanks for not breaking my arm. Ethan shook it, the warmth in his chest growing, a soldier finding connection in an unexpected place. Thanks for not making me fill out more paperwork. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's program expanded across the West Coast, a testament to his vision, a ripple effect of change. Stores reported fewer thefts and a better work environment. Employees felt safe, valued, empowered, a community rebuilt through quiet courage. At a company event in San Francisco, Ethan spoke to a room of executives. Daniel, now a regional manager, beaming in the front row, his pride a silent testament to their shared journey. What we've learned, Ethan said, his voice resonant, a soldier addressing his troops, is that security isn't just about cameras or alarms. It's about community, shared values, restoring trust. After the event, Daniel approached, a grin on his face, a friend celebrating a victory. Remember when I thought I'd have to fire you? I remember, Ethan replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips, a soldier finding humor in the chaos. They want to take your program national, Daniel said, his voice bright with excitement. You're a bit of a legend now. Ethan shook his head, uncomfortable with the label, a soldier seeking purpose, not glory. I didn't do anything special. I just took a stand. Sometimes, Daniel said, his voice warm, that's all it takes. That night, driving back to Oakland, Ethan reflected on his journey, from frustration to action to transformation, a soldier finding his way home. He hadn't solved the deep societal issues behind the thefts, but he'd found a way to channel his experience into something meaningful, a spark of hope in a world that often felt hopeless. His phone buzzed with an email from Caleb, who'd kept in touch, a young man on a new path. I got that internship I told you about. The message read, a testament to change. I don't think I'd have made it this far without our run-in. Sometimes, you need someone who won't step aside, you know. Ethan smiled, the words echoing a lesson from his first commander, Captain Marshall. We can't control the circumstances, only how we respond. At the veterans meeting the next week, Ethan shared his story, the group his safe haven where he didn't have to explain his nightmares, a sanctuary of understanding. What I've realized, he said, his voice steady, a soldier finding his truth, is that our war experiences, our training, our reflexes, aren't a burden. They're our strength. Amelia, who challenged him before, nodded, her eyes warm with approval. You found your middle ground, Nathan added, his voice gruff but warm. And something more, a purpose. The word struck Ethan like a revelation, resonating deep within him, a soldier discovering his mission. He sat alone after the meeting, memories of Fallujah flickering through his mind. The desert nights, the friends he'd lost, the young man from Bakersfield searching for meaning. Now he'd found it, not despite his past, but through it, a soldier standing tall in a new kind of battle. The next morning, Ethan paused before the glass door of Gadget Haven, staring at his reflection, the scar on his temple a testament to his past, his military bearing a constant reminder of who he was. But his eyes held something new. Purpose, a light in the darkness. He wasn't just a veteran struggling to fit in. He was a man who'd rediscovered his worth in peace, a soldier fighting for a new cause. He stepped inside, ready to stand not against, but for something greater, a hero in the everyday. I came back from the desert with scars that don't show, searching for my place in a world I don't know. I traded my uniform for everyday clothes, but some battles follow wherever I go. They say look away, it's easier that way. Keep your head down, bury your pain. But there's a voice inside I can't ignore, reminding me what I was fighting for. It's about standing your ground when no one else will, finding purpose in the pain, being more than just a man. It's dignity, not glory, honor in the everyday. Some fights don't need wins, just the courage to stay. This country I love, this land I defended, carries wounds that run deep, but they can be mended. Not with force or rage, but with quiet conviction. A single moment of truth can spark the healing. What if the battle isn't out there at all, but within our hearts, behind these walls? It takes courage to stand, to hold what's right, when it's easier to look away. Ethan's story isn't just his, it's ours, a testament to the power of integrity, the strength of purpose, the courage to stand when the world looks away. What moment in your life called you to stand up, to hold fast to your values, to be more than just a bystander? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you found your purpose, how you became a hero in your own way. At Daily Narrated Stories, we're committed to bringing you tales that inspire, uplift, and remind us of the power within us all. Stories that light the way in the darkest moments. If Ethan's journey moved you, don't miss out, subscribe now, and join our community. We're racing toward 1,000 subscribers, and we need your support to get there, to keep sharing these life-changing stories. Don't wait. Hit that button, comment your thoughts, and let's keep this journey alive together, because sometimes, all it takes is one person who won't step aside.